Somebody I recognize, yeah.
Here's Nina. And Martin is a participant in my poetry classes.
How are you?
I actually recognize a few names.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. Wonderful. We'll just give it another minute.
Sure, absolutely. I'm in no rush. I got up already.
We better not see any yawns tonight because Rachel got up at 5, before 5.
My youngest grandson just left for Israel this afternoon.
That's wonderful.
Wonderful.
Yes, he's visiting.
We can see the Chevra coming back, the tourist buses, you know, Yafo,
Yes.
where I live, the port area is crowded again. It's just good. Life is coming back. Our tour guide friends are busy again.
Great.
You feel like you can get out too, Rachel?
Me? I just
Yeah.
came back from the trip to Sinai, scuba diving.
I guess you feel that you can.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening for a very special presentation. I'm Rabbi Feinstein. This is Valley Beth Shalom College of Jewish Studies. We're live together, and we're delighted to welcome all of you. We have had a marvelous experience learning this year. We've enjoyed a marvelous experience exploring all of the parts of Jewish and Israeli identity through Israeli culture. We've looked at art and music, film and television, literature, poetry, and we have really found some deep truths about Israeli culture. And tonight and next week, we're going to look at two principal events and how they're refracted through the experience of Israel. Tonight, of course, Yom HaShoah, the commemoration of the Holocaust, and next week, Yom HaAtzmaut, or Yom HaZikaron, and then Yom HaAtzmaut. Before I introduce our presenter, I want to say a very big thank you to everyone who's made this series so wonderful and possible. First, of course, our dear friends Jess and Lil Baim, whose generosity and kindness have made all of this possible. And I hope that they're shepping big nachas from all of this, because it is certainly a glorious project that we've taken on together, and we're so proud of it, and we're so proud of them. And so thank you, Jess and Lil, and I hope that you have great joy from all of this. My dear friend Alana Zimmerman, my partner at Valley Beth Shalom, whose technical genius makes everything happen. And I want to thank you, Alana, for this. And thank you to everyone who's been joining us. So tonight, we commemorate with Jews across the world Yom HaShoah. Very important holiday because, as you know, we've just finished Pesach. We just finished spending 8 days here in diaspora, 8 days talking about a God's hand in history, talking about redemption and liberation, talking about escaping from slavery and crossing a Red Sea and finding freedom on the other side. And now we jump to the two principal events that shape our contemporary Jewish world: the commemoration of the most profound atrocity ever committed, not just against us, but against anybody in the entire world, the Yom HaShoah. And next week, the remarkable and redemptive power of the rebirth of the state of Israel. Before we begin tonight's session and I introduce tonight's presenter, it has become a custom throughout the Jewish world, and particularly here in our Jewish world, to light a yellow yahrzeit candle, this kind of candle. A yahrzeit candle to remember 6 million souls ripped from life and taken from us. Or as one poet put it, not a third of the Jewish people, but a third of each of us taken in the Shoah. And yellow, of course, to remember the color of the star that was placed on Jewish clothes, Jewish chests, in order to identify us. We are still identified, still deeply proud of who we are. And tonight we mourn and grieve, And at the same time, we celebrate life as it has been emerged from the ashes and from the shadows. So we light this candle and remember the souls that are commemorated tonight. Our presenter tonight is one of my favorite teachers. Whenever Nina and I get to go to Hartman in the summertime, we make a pilgrimage to Rachel's classes because they are always so inspiring, so powerful, so deeply informed. And the material that we take from them, we have an opportunity to teach during the course of the year. She is a teacher of teachers and a fountain of Jewish love and of Jewish life. So please welcome our dear friend, Rachel Korazim, who has gotten up at 5 o'clock in the morning in the beautiful city of Yafo. I think she's the only one up in
4:30
Yafo.
to be more precise.
4:30 to be more precise, even before the hummus guy opens up, in order to teach us Torah this evening. So Rachel, Brucha Ba'ah, welcome. We are deeply honored to learn with you tonight.
Okay, Toda Rabba, Rabbi Feinstein, I should say. And there is such a huge temptation to spend a few minutes just recognizing the names that I recognize in this holy congregation and to greet them especially, but I will not do that in order, A, not to offend those who I do not know by name, and mainly so that we can dedicate all the time that we have for our topic tonight, this morning. Since the beginning of COVID over 2 years ago, I have developed new customs of greeting audiences by not saying good evening or good night, because I'm teaching on Zoom all the time, and with the time zones, I do not always remember who is who in my holy congregation of learners of Israeli literature worldwide. And into our topic. As I am getting ready to share with you the PowerPoint that I have prepared, I feel committed and obliged to note that the presentation that I am sharing with you today is one that I have developed 15 years ago, over 15 years ago, in the year 2005, actually 17 by now. Never did I dream that I will use a PowerPoint presentation for it. So I would like you to imagine those pre-COVID years and times that are coming back, where I would do this presentation always in a very particular surrounding. It will be early in the morning, normally around 8, sometimes 9 o'clock, depending on the group. It will normally happen in a hotel room, normally in Yerushalayim. And there will be a congregation, Valley Bet Shalom, or any other congregation that asked me to meet with them in the hotel on the day they are getting ready to go to Yad Vashem, to visit the central commemoration place for the Shoah in Israel. And I will always start my presentation by saying to them, dear friends, you are going to Yad Vashem in an hour. What can I do for you about the Shoah that you will not do in Yad Vashem anyway? So let me tell you what I can do for you. So I'd like you to imagine that, yes, I know you're not going to Yad Vashem today, but with the hope and the bracha and the tefillah that you will be coming back to Israel soon. And we will have such events organized together or with other speakers. So having said all that, let me now do the presentation that I have created for these unique COVID days. And please look at my title, Israeli Society and the Holocaust, or why did we need a new Yad Vashem museum? So here is the focus of what we are doing. I trust most of you have been to Israel. I trust most of you have long ago stopped counting the times you have been to Israel. So by virtue of that, many of you may know that Israel had a Yad Vashem museum from the very, very early years of the state, actually from the early 50s. Very soon after the survivors have started coming, following a liberation to Israel, very soon after the establishment of the state of Israel, in the very early 50s, people got together with the knowledge we need to remember. We need to do something. And they created a museum that you must have visited way prior to 2005, which is the museum I'm going to talk about. So the question is exactly my subtitle. If we had a museum about the Holocaust that we created immediately after, why would we need a new one? What had changed? Obviously, the Holocaust didn't change, was bad enough the first time. We didn't need for it to change. So what could have changed in the state of Israel that called upon this need to rethink what made people walk through the aisles of the museum that they or others created and going like, not good. When did that change start happening? When were people looking at the early narrative of the Shoah in Israel and saying, we need to readdress. So normally I'm putting in front of my audience the question, was it new information that came out maybe with the opening of archives? Was it new technology that made the old museum a little bit redundant and sort of old style? Or have we changed? Are there some new approaches? I think you can guess that this is where I'm taking you. So in order to that, I'm inviting you to look at the left-hand side of my PowerPoint slide and look at the cartoon. And I trust most of you, even if you are not fluent Hebrew speakers, know the Hebrew alphabet. So you can look at the bottom left side corner of the cartoon, and you will see the Hebrew letters Daled, Vav, Shin. Can people see that? Ilana, can you just nod with your head? Is that clear enough? Thank you. So Dosh, because there is the Cholam on the Vav, you can even see that. Dosh is the nickname, the short of the last name of the artist who created this. His name was Katriel, first name Gardosh. And if there are any people who are familiar with Hungarians, they would immediately recognize from my accent and even from the name that this is a Hungarian name. By the way, it's a very Hungarian name, but very typical for Jews who have changed their more Jewish names into Hungarian. But for that, we need another lecture. Katriel Gardosh, long gone, was a Holocaust survivor who came to Israel from Hungary in the early years of the state, alongside with the famous writer, humorist, Ephraim Kishon. If you were into Israeli politics in, I don't know, the last 5 decades, you would remember maybe Tomi Lapid. This is the generation of Holocaust survivors who came to Israel in the early years and became very involved in the state. And his cartoons had accompanied the early years of the state. And he is the person, the artist, who created the figure of the young Israeli sitting on that tree branch. And we called him Srolik, you may remember, which is nickname for Yisrael, Srolik. This was Srolik. Many have forgotten about him. So let us look at what makes Srolik in the eyes of this new immigrant from Hungary, a typical Israeli. So I'll start from the bottom. His what we called sandalim tanachiyot, biblical sandals or Israeli sandals or whatever. That was a typical part of his attire, right? Of course, he has that headgear, the kova tembel, that for many, many, many years was symbolic of Israelis. None of us wears it anymore. I think probably that if you wanted to buy one, you'll have to go to tourist souvenir shops because they are not available in regular stores anymore. But with that, we are finished laughing. So this Srolik of Katriel Gardosh's is doing everything. He is going to the army and he's shopping in the market and he's dating girls in the different cartoons that appear weekly. I think that Katriel Gardosh was working for Ma'ariv, the daily that is still in existence, and you can look him up. Now I want you to look at what Srolik is doing in this cartoon. He's sitting on a tree branch of a tree that looks very weird because it had a major trunk that is no more. You can see that on the left-hand side of the bottom of the tree. And now there is another branch growing up. It is pretty strong. It can carry Srolik, but it's not as strong as the one that was cut out yet in the early years. And Srolik is, smilingly sitting. And now you will tell me, on his right-hand side, which is our left, is he touching that branch that looks a little bit like a weeping willow with its leaves dropping like tears, or is he pushing it away? I think that Dosh had left this ambiguous for us to decide. On the other hand, his left hand, or arm rather, on our right, oh, he is holding on to that other branch with the branches upright, and none of the leaves is falling and looking like the menorah, the emblem of the state of Israel. I think the statement is very clear. Our young Srolik in the early years of the state is in between these two branches. On one side, something very strong, emblem of the state of Israel, upright, no weeping, huge smile, his head is turned there. On the other hand, leaning, weeping, pushing away the other branch, which is tending to lean, not so strong, losing its leaves that look like tears over that missing branch. In the many years, and Rabbi Feinstein, thank you for the introduction, that I have been involved in Holocaust education, I have yet to find a better articulation of those early years of the state of Israel and how survivors would feel about their encounter with Israeli society. There was a need to embrace the strong. There was a need to embrace the future. There was a need to not even look at that which was weeping. It was there. You could not disregard it. The missing branch was there, but we didn't look that way. We didn't want to look that way. So in parentheses, this is the moment for me to say my classical, well-known Rachel Korozim comment. If any of you educators would like to have this cartoon, would like to use the PowerPoint presentation for your needs, all you need to know is let me know, or not even that, I will send it to Elena and you can take it from there, okay? It's not mine, it's ours. It's a Jewish expression that belongs to all of us. And I would love for other people to lean on these branches as well. So this is our starting point. We are exploring Israeli society's relationship to the Holocaust by looking at the early years and moving towards the present, okay? Come with me on this journey. So why are we doing that? We are doing that in order to say Yad Vashem is a particularly Israeli Holocaust museum, and therefore it expresses the Israeli point of view on the Shoah and the change in that. At which point my audiences, like as you sitting now at Valley Bet Shalom, or my, crowd or people sitting in that hotel room, who can go in their heart, oh, come on, Rachel, the Holocaust is the Holocaust is the Holocaust. How is Israeli museums about the Holocaust going to be different from any other museum that I have seen in LA or in Washington, DC, or in Skokie, Illinois, or anywhere else in the world? So let us explore that nation. What makes Yad Vashem an expression of the Israeli understanding of the Holocaust? So, for example, this is the one in Berlin, one of the many in Berlin. And look at how different it is from anything that you know in America. Anything that we know in Yad Vashem looks like this amassed collection of sarcophagus, and you lose your way in between them, and there is a total sense of confusion, and it's out there in the city square, mind you, just in front of the American Embassy, if you need to know, in Berlin, as if there is an expression of that society or that city. This is going to be in the open space here. We are going to get lost between those sarcophagi, because this is what we allowed to happen. This is what we created, a German statement. Let us go now. And of course, you know, the Washington DC Museum and the LA Museum, with which, thank God, I'm familiar with. Now I'm going to invite you to join me to Yad Vashem, not into the historical museum, just the outdoors. A tour that I offered many a time, and that maybe some of you in the audience have taken part of. The main square of Yad Vashem, let us pretend that I'm your tour guide. So I will say, come, 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 get nearer to the main square. And in front of you, there is a monument. I know you do not see the details now. I'll show them to you in a minute. I want you to have this sense of coming closer, because there is this wall that is at the tip of the main square of the Yad Vashem space, I would say, not exactly the museum. The museum is inside, but the Yad Vashem space. And it has two parts that seem as if they are two different works of art, but they are actually one. So, Chavre, come nearer. Here we are. And what you can see, that smack in the middle, that quote that we have just recently read in the Haggadah, and thank you, Rabbi Feinstein, for making the connection to Pesach. But the Ma'achai, you shall live out of your blood, and the female address of that. On the left-hand side, oh, the upright, strong Chevre, with a man in the middle. Just look at him, his torso, his hand has a Molotov cocktail. He is looking ahead, and all around him, people who have joined him in this uprising and battle. And if chas v'chalila, somebody fell on the road, step on them and continue the march and resist. And on the right-hand side, a group of people, heads bowed, with only one Moses-like figure. He is not holding a Aseret Dibrot, the Ten Commandments, he's holding Torah. And they are all led somewhere, women, old people, heads bowed. And in the background, hard to discern, but once I tell you, you will see the bayonets of the soldiers who are leading them, and we now know where they are leading them. Did you notice that the only person in this part of the sculpture that is looking at the audience is a young child? Okay, everybody else is with their heads bowed, and the Moses-like figure is looking up. But the only person looking at the spectators is a very young child who is probably not understanding what is happening. Look at the separation, real separation between the heroes, and I will put quotation marks, and the sheep to the slaughter, the victims. This, just like the Dosh cartoon, was Israel of the early years. The Rappaport monument, which is what we are facing, at the center of the Warsaw Square, articulates the understanding that made us give a title for this name. And again, Rabbi Feinstein, you said Yom HaShoah, but you know as well as I do, and maybe better, that this is not the full name of the day. And for reasons of convenience, because not everybody speaks Hebrew, for our need to keep things short and easy, we say Yom HaShoah, but it's not the name. The name is Yom HaZikaron LaShoah VeLaGvura, the day of commemoration for Holocaust and heroism. And my generation that grew up and was raised in the Israeli education system, I was born in the year 1946. You can now quickly calculate how old I am, which is older than the state that was born in 1948. When we went through the Israeli education system, and when my kids, who are now well over 50, went through the Israeli education system, thank God not my grandchildren anymore, it was made very clear to us who was Shoah, Holocaust, and who was Gvura, heroism. Gvura were three groups of people. The ghetto fighters like Mordechai Anilevich and his friends here in this, the parachutists that were dropped behind Nazi enemy lines to try and help our brethren. And you know, there were 31 of them, but who can remember 31? Chana Senesh will do, right? We will just remember Chana Senesh and she will stand for them. And then the third group was the partisans in the forest, right? And these were our heroes. These were our heroes. Everybody else they were victims. And they, we were told, was a little bit or more than a little bit of a judgmental approach. They went like sheep to the slaughter. And we Israelis immediately knew that we needed not to follow that route. We needed to be with the Mordechai Anileviches. We needed to be with Chana Senesh, who, like Misa Manu, who made us embrace that judgmental position, to say that it was more heroic to stand on a rooftop in the Warsaw Ghetto, which I'll grant you is pretty heroic, but is it more heroic than sharing a slice of bread with another inmate in Auschwitz? Like, who exactly is going to be the judge of that? More heroic than Janusz Korczak? Joining the orphans on their way to Treblinka in the same Warsaw Ghetto? And we put one of them in one category and the other in the other. I hope you are already following me in our early steps of this journey to recognize the early narrative and to wait with me impatiently for the moment that it will start changing, okay? How do we put our finger on that? Follow me. So here is Yad Vashem, and in 2005, a new museum is created, and you can see the white arrow-like structure that is cutting into the hill of the Jerusalem hills, the Judean hills, with that new story. And at the heart of the campus, the heart is not the Warsaw Square anymore. It's there, but there is a new heart, a new story breaking through literally the already traditional space of Yad Vashem. Okay, so inaugurated in 2005, as I am telling you. So let us go and look at narratives closely. And this is again a moment for you to stop me and say, Rachel, when you say Israeli narrative, I have visited Israel so many times. I'm speaking to so many Israelis. There might be, I even looked through the names Israelis in the room, in our virtual class right now. Is there such a thing as one Israeli narrative? Like, come on, you guys cannot agree on anything. How dare you talk to us about one Israeli narrative? No, I do not dare. So I will say, I will invite you to look virtually at the two ends, ideological ends, of the Israeli society, and even try to bridge the in-between, the extreme Zionist, secular, I'm not even going left and right, and on the other side, the extreme Haredi world, and hopefully reach that golden in-between that we all hope for, that doesn't really exist, but we are hoping for that. Okay, so yes, I will be cognizant of the difference of narratives in Israeli society. I will not treat them as one chunk. In order to do that, and trust me that I did not forget my topic, I'm taking you to the year 1946. I have a reason for that. I could have started my narrative in the years of World War II. I know the history of World War II. But have I been attempting to do that with an American audience like yours? Immediately the question will be there and present in the room, will rise of who knew what when. We didn't know. We were not told. La 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 la. Okay, drop it. Let's leave the years of the who knew what when, and let us take a full year after liberation. Liberation is in 45. Yalla, let's go to 1946. By that time, both survivors and liberators reach the blessed coast of the United States of America and of British Mandate Palestine. Because we had Jews who had fought alongside the Brits in Europe, and they are coming home as liberators, and with them the early survivors. And in America, the same. Liberators are coming back, and alongside them, the early survivors. And there is no better community than the Los Angeles Jewish community to have welcomed the early survivors. And thanks to my many visits to your community, I know a bit about that. We are not going there. But you know that these people were amongst you from the very early years. When people come, and a few of those pictures, whether coming to Israel or coming to America, doesn't matter. They will be asked, I know, what was it like? And they will start saying, well, you know, this happened. And because of that, I think that happened. And after that, it just transpired that. And before you know it, you have a narrative. And we are in the business of listening to these narratives today. Among the people who come to Israel, I need for you to see and to understand that part of my bio that is never presented when I am introduced, and that the fact that I am the daughter of survivors. On the right-hand side, you can see the people on the Smyrna, one of the clandestine immigrants' boats to reach the coast of British Mandate Palestine on May of 1946. And since you know that this is the year I was born in, by the way, this is the reason that I'm telling you the year. And if I tell you now that, the woman on the lower rank of the boat, the one with the white top, leaning outside, sort of looking at the coast of Haifa. The picture is taken from the Haifa pier in the port of Haifa. This is my mother. Passed away 12 years ago, Zichrona Livracha. And this is May, I was born in October. She is pregnant with me. So not that I have many memories and recollections of the trip to Israel, but I am in that picture. I am part of this narrative, okay? And when they come, both liberators and survivors will start the narrative. I am now taking you for the beginning of my story, Dafka, not to LA and not to Haifa, Israel, but Dafka to Germany. Yes, I know my topic, Israeli society. Haven't forgotten me, don't worry. But we need to go to Germany in the year of 1946, because at this time in history that there is the largest number of survivors of Nazi concentration camps, Dafka in Germany. So you will ask me, hang on, Rachel, why? I have studied the history of the Holocaust, and I know that the majority of the Nazi concentration camps were not in Germany. They were in Poland, and they were in Moldavia, and they were mainly in Poland. So how come so many survivors Dafka there? So for that, you need to, in front of your eyes and now on the screen, visualize the map of Europe and know how the Allies, there were 4 of them, the Brits, the Americans, the French, and the Russians. The Americans, the French, the Brits, at this point of the end of World War II are coming from the West, D-Day, the longest day, all those stories. The Russians are pushing the Nazis back from the east. And as they are pushing them back to Germany, they have to evacuate the death camps in Poland. And they are forced marching the remnant of survivors with them into Germany. It was not enough for the survivors to have survived the horrible years of Nazi rule. They now had to go through these terrible marches, being starved on the way and frozen on the way and shot at on the way. End result, by liberation, they are in Germany. So here are the Russians pushing them back into Germany on these forced marches called the death marches oftentimes. Needless to look at those details now because they're not our story. So let's just go to Germany. And you can recognize the combined flag of the Allies on the right-hand side. And you know now that liberated Germany is divided, and I gave you the colors, between the four liberating forces: the American, the Brits, the French, and the Russian. And let me ask you a speculative question, and this is a good moment for me to step out of my PowerPoint, look at you, Chevra, and not at myself, by going to the gallery, and ask you, if you will, those of you who have turned their cameras on, and those who are willing to turn their cameras on, if you were a Jewish survivor of a Nazi concentration camp, and you found yourself in Germany in the year 1946 after liberation, which of the four zones do you want to be in? Let me be very clear. The fact that you are in a given zone doesn't give you a travel ticket to that country. If you are in the American zone, you're not going to get a ticket to go to New York or LA. But even for now, if you are a Jewish survivor of a Nazi concentration camp on German soil in the year 1945 or 46, which one of the four zones would you like to be in? And I will allow, if the people who are monitoring this can let people use their mics and unmute themselves, I would allow, if I see a raised hand in front of the camera, or if you do, or if you're using your digital hand, if you're familiar with that, I will allow a comment or two if you want to take me. Give me your thoughts. Which of the four zones you want to be in? Anybody? You know what will happen if you don't answer me? I'll start bugging the rabbis.
Okay.
So why don't you volunteer for them? Anybody? Come on, Nina.
Okay,
Which of the four zones?
go to the US territory, because I
Yeah.
think
Why is that? Why?
they would be the friendliest to me, I feel, maybe.
You feel so friendliness. Okay, I let that lie for a minute. Please mute yourself back. Anybody else? Rabbi Feinstein, Nina is saying American zone. Anybody else?
Martin Bobrovsky in the chat, and Judy also said, and it looks like Sally said American.
Okay, I will go with that, I think. I agree with you, Chevra, and back to my PowerPoint presentation. But I will go in a line slightly different from Nina's. I will go by elimination. If you are not a die-hard communist, is there anything for you in the Russian zone? Is anybody saying yes, no? Okay, I'll take your no for everybody, Nina, because that's one of the screens that I can see. The French, let me remind you, had nothing, garnished. Their country was overtaken by Germany at the beginning of World War II and looted to the ground. You're left with the Brits and the Americans. Who will have more food? Who will have better medical treatment? Where do you have a chance to see some Jewish people among the staff and the people in uniform? I think you are repeating after me, the American zone, the American zone, the American zone. The Americans were inundated by the survivors, and they needed to take care of them, and they did. And they created that which we later started to call the DP camps, displaced persons. How I love this euphemism, So American. That was their main problem, these people, that they have been displaced. Okay, fine. Let's go with the euphemism, the DP camps. And we're going to visit virtually one of those in the American zone to meet two survivors who will represent for us the variety of opinions within the Jewish people, because, you know, even survivors were not one block ideologically. So we are going to one of the DP camps in the American zone on German soil in the year 1946. And we are going to meet two imaginary, symbolic, metaphorical survivors. So let me bring them in, representatives of the two ends, if you wish, of the Jewish ideological continuum. So we will have on one end your person who could have been born in any of Europe's capitals prior to the war. I'm not going to say assimilated, but a person who they are comfortable with their Jewishness, but also with their belonging to the non-Jewish society of their country. I trust you know people like that. And on the other hand, we will take somebody from the more observant Haredi world, let us say a Satmar community, okay, because this is as extreme an ideological end on that side that I can think of. And let us start fantasizing and creating those figures. So one of them, shall we call him Chaim Moshe Cohen? That would be characteristic. And the other one I'm inventing. I'm going to make him a medical professor, Martin Weiss. Probably if he survived and made it to America, he will become white very quickly. I think so. This will be one of the changes that people will make. And let us start to create the figure. Our professor would have what? Before the war, prior to the atrocities, a wife and 3 kids, maybe 2. He would have lived in Vienna, nice place for a professor like himself. He would have a season ticket, he and the wife would have a season ticket to the Vienna Opera, do you think? I think they would. And the kids, piano classes to the little girl, you're thinking? And the boys, some soccer? And summer vacations, where would you send them? To the Bavarian Alps for the mountains, or to the Adriatic Sea for the seashore? I just am taking you through this because I want for us to start again thinking about these people as real people that we know, okay? That was before. Now he's in the DP camp, and let me tell you, not a word from the wife and kids yet. And it's been a year. Just bear him in your mind and heart. I just want to remind you that with the background that I have described, probably a fair number of his friends and acquaintances, and maybe even family, would have been non-Jews at the time. So therefore, he might have had a fighting chance with his connections to find some forged papers, to find a hiding place for one of the family members. It is an option. Oy, but the other end. If somebody would have be an angel and hide or provide papers for the Weiss family, what would the Cohens have? What kind of relationship with non-Jews do they have back in Satmar under the Carpathian Mountains? Beautiful part of the world. Let me tell you, how do I know? I visited more than once. Elie Wiesel comes from these parts. He was not Satmar, but he comes from this area. And the kids, oh, probably this is more or less what they would have looked like. Fluent Yiddish speakers, I'm thinking. And would anybody hide kids like that? One of them opens his mouth with that heavy-duty Yiddish accent, and they are gone, right? Large family. I don't think many non-Jewish friends in it. And then came the day, and they are deported, and they are gone. But our dear Moshe has survived. Moshe Chaim has survived. And once he arrived to the DP camp, again, not a word from anybody of his larger family. And you know the Moshe Chaim Cohens of this world. You met them or heard about them. As soon as he arrived into the DP camp, he started organizing a little shtibel, regular daily gatherings for prayers. And this morning at Shachrit, somebody had started the rumor. Remember, it's not this morning, 2022. It's 1946. Somebody at synagogue had started a rumor. They were saying that their rabbi, Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum, the Satmar Rebbe of the time, had survived. Wow, Baruch Hashem. Next thing you know, they were telling them that the Rebbe, here is a picture of Yoel Teitelbaum at that time, that the Rebbe, not only did he survive, he went to New York, to Williamsburg. A person like Chaim Moshe Cohen, the first thing he'd want to go is to follow the Rebbe for two main reasons. A, if there is half a chance for life to go back to what it used to be as he knew it, it would be by the Rebbe. But there's a practical reason. But he knows and you know that everybody from his family and surrounding would do the same. So if you wanted to find out about survivors, you go by the Rebbe, because everybody else would go by the Rebbe. Who knows? One of the older kids, you know, he might have had what, 7, 8, 9. The young ones he has seen with her own eyes. But who knows, maybe one of the older ones. The wife he had seen with his own eyes, but maybe, you know, a cousin, a sister of the wife, maybe the chance to start a new family, who knows? Go by the Rebbe. In the year 1946, the Satmar Rebbe, Yoel Teitelbaum, now of blessed memory, and I always put the link at the bottom of my slide just to remind you that there is a lot of information to be found about that I'm not going to share today. And the yeshiva, of course, the Satmar yeshiva did not exist at the time, it was built later, but the Rebbe already had a gathering in Williamsburg in the year 1946. It's well known. So we are going to imagine that our survivor from the DP camp, who finally had put penny and penny together and made it to New York, went to that meeting. When you hear when you read, actually, not here, there is no recording, to the best of my knowledge. But when you read the memoirs of people who were present at that meeting, it will become very clear that the rabbi in his words was addressing a question. So we are going to imagine that it was our Moshe Chaim Cohen who had asked the question. So again, I'm stepping out for a minute for drama and try to engage your imagination by asking, if you're Moshe Chaim Cohen, after what your eyes have seen, and you have finally a chance to speak to your spiritual leader, what's the question burning on the tip of your tongue? One word. Rabbi, you don't need to unmute yourself. Say it with your lips. Rabbi, why? We have done everything we were supposed to do. And the children, why? The Satmar Rebbe had addressed the question of why did the Holocaust happen. I have his answer on the screen. I know you will hate it. So I want you to know that it's not my answer. I'm just a storyteller. It's his answer. I don't like it either, needless to say. The Rebbe had said that the Holocaust, here you can read alongside with me, the Holocaust is a punishment of the Jewish people for its sins and primarily for the sins of Zionism. The Zionist concept implied, this is now my explanation, a denial of God's ability to deliver his people and disrupted the natural place of the people of Israel destined to remain exiled until the true deliverance. This was that famous speech, and they caused a lot of rifts within the Jewish people due to that. I'm not pointing a blaming finger. I'm just sharing with you a history that has an impact on our topic, Israeli society and the Holocaust. How did that transpire? Very easy. For that, I'm taking you back to 1500 years ago, back to Babylon, to the times where the center, the spiritual center of the Jewish people is far away from the land of Israel, also far away from New York and Europe. It's in Babylon where major centers, yeshivot we call them, are created for learning. And rabbi sages are looking at every single aspect of Jewish life and debating, arguing, ruling, collecting their rulings, never neglecting to connect, to include the opinion of the minority that was not accepted, and the whole compilation, you know, as well as I and better than me, is called the Babylonian Talmud. One of the questions that they address themselves to is the issue of now, not now, back then, 1500 years ago, that we are in exile. How do we make sure that we remain alive and Jewish? And I'm cutting short, and they come up with the notion of the three oaths. We need to commit to three things. And if we do that, it doesn't mean that there won't be a local persecution here and there, but nothing major. And I'm quoting the Hebrew while the English is on the screen. Shelo limrod b'malchuyot, do not rebel against the kingdoms, the nations. Shelo la'alot b'choma, do not climb the walls. Shelo lidchok et haketz, do not push the end. Let us now give modern words to these medieval notions and explain how they impact it. The rabbis say, you want to remain alive and Jewish? Live by the law of the country, okay? And the question is this still true of American Jews wherever they are? And I think it is. That no matter what you think politically, you are still a loyal American citizen acting by the law. Whether you vote this way or the other, it's totally irrelevant. Both are legal, okay? And should a Jew misbehave in America, how does that make you feel? You recognize the Chevra, right? And you will cringe and you will say, Shande, shame. And I will ask you, why would you feel shame? You have done nothing. You say, yes, but they, the others, they see one of us, they see all of us. It's part of me. You should not do like that. So as I say, lo and behold, our Talmudic rabbis knew something that was still relevant. Oh no, all of us know. The other one, do not force your entry. Do not climb the walls. I could take you to Middle Ages Krakow, that Jews were not allowed to live inside, and they settled just outside of the wall in order to make a living through the city. I could take you to British Mandate Palestine, when they do not let Jews in and we protest against the white paper. I can take you to American-built Jewish hospitals because Jews were not allowed to practice in the regular hospitals. You create your own, you do not force your entry. So again, lo and behold. And as per Messiah, yeah, not to force the end. Well, has he come yet? No, wait for Messiah. And did the Zionist movement wait for Messiah? I don't think so. So let us now think from the point of view of the Satmar Rebbe, who is followed by many in the Haredi world as per these issues. Was Zionism legal in Tsarist Russia? No. Where it started? Were the gates of the land of Israel open? No. Has Messiah come? No. So whether you like the Satmar Rebbe or not is totally immaterial. From his perspective, it made total sense. You think that this has disappeared from the Jewish world? I'm taking you back now to Yad Vashem, to the same monument. And now you understand why I included it in my presentation to start with. This is a graffiti that would appear on the walls of Yad Vashem, normally close to Yom HaShoah. The Zionist leadership wanted the Shoah. This is written not by Palestinian terrorists. This is written by Jews on a Jewish memorial in the state of Israel. It's still part of our society, not the majority, but it's there, okay? Let us now consider our other person. You know, the professor, Professor White, the medical professor, for whom we imagined the whole family and background, etc. And I told you, not a word from his wife and children yet. And while he's at DP camp, a letter reaches him from his buddies, you know, back in medical school in Vienna, when he joined that Jewish club. There was always a Jewish club in university. And in his case, it was called Blau-Weiß. And I've given you the real emblem, etc., just to make the story close to the historical fact. And in that club, they were dreaming in the 20s, way prior to the Holocaust, of going to the land of Israel, creating a kibbutz, drying the swamps, what have you. And he went home one day and shared his enthusiasm with his family. And I know 100% in my imaginary story, close to reality, what the family would have told him at the time. Are you nuts? Is this what we are working so hard for, to put you through medical school? For you to go to that desert? And his fiancée, I know what she would have said. She said, oh, darling, please, let's get married first and then we'll see. How do I know that? Because I would probably have said the same. This is how I know it. So they never made Aliyah. And life was good. And then it stopped being good. While in the DP camp, a letter reaches him from one of his buddies at the time. And it says, dear friend, I just heard that you survived. Let me tell you, I did make Aliyah at the time. And the drying swamps did not work out that well for me. So I moved to Jerusalem, continued my medical studies, became a doctor. What can I tell you? Life is good. I now have a nice practice. Also, as of a couple of years ago, I'm teaching in the medical school in Jerusalem. And man, let me tell you, we need you here. You and I know that when we finally get the state, you know, the year is 1946. He doesn't know exactly when it will happen, but he knows it's coming. And you and I know that when we get our state, it will not enough to have sweaty pioneers and rah-rah soldiers. They will need people like you and I to build up the medical system, to create medical services in the country, to treat the people who need it. Please join us. I'd like for us to believe that our imaginary character is saying, okay, yes, I will do that. And since he is a famous professor from Vienna, I think that the power, really the top leadership of the Jews in the land of Israel, the Zionist leadership at the time, would like to meet with him. So you can choose your politics. I'm really not forcing your hand there, but I'm going to take him in my imaginary character's world to meet with Ben Gurion. How about that? You cannot do better than that. Ben Gurion at the time, I mean, you could have him meet Begin, I don't care, but I'm going with Ben Gurion, which tells you a little bit about me. So Ben Gurion is now in those major offices of the Jewish Agency. The building is still there. It was inaugurated the year before. And Ben Gurion has his offices there in Jerusalem. When he is in Jerusalem, he has some in Tel Aviv as well. And he will see our buddy. And our friend, you know, he admires Ben Gurion. He is not going to waste his time. He will say, you know, sir, or whatever way you addressed Ben Gurion at the time, maybe Chaver, he would say, you know, I really admire your work. You must be terribly busy these days. Let me have just one question, sir. Why do you think the Holocaust happened? You know, the same question that is addressed to the Satmar Rebbe on the other hand. And Ben Gurion had an answer, and he would look at the professor and he would say, Professor, haven't we Zionist leaders traveled the towns and capitals of Europe, making speeches, pleading with you guys, come join us. Did you listen? So look what is happening in the Jewish world. On one hand, the Holocaust happened because we were Zionists. On the other hand, the Holocaust happened because we were not Zionist enough. Thank you very much. Now it's crystal clear. It's all within the Jewish people. We haven't crossed the street to ask the opinion of the church about that. Right? Now, you're smart people. And you can see alongside with me that in spite of the tremendous gap between these two opinions, there is one major common denominator. Who is responsible in both cases? We are. Jews are. And you're going to tell me or think in your heart, classical Jewish response always assume guilt and responsibility. I'm not letting you get away with it. A, because Catholics are pretty good at the guilt as well, but that's not my reason. Because I'd like you to see what is there in front of our eyes. And again, a good moment for me to step out so I can see you, even if you're just nodding either way. You do not need to be a Jew for that. It's a classical victim's response. Anything bad happens, where did I go wrong? What could I have done differently? Because we like to think of ourselves as responsible for everything that happens to us. And therefore, if it happened, I must have a share in responsibility. My statement to you today, as we are reaching very soon the closure of my comments, is that early Holocaust narrative in Israel comes from the starting point of assuming responsibility. We went wrong. And when the change will come, it will come alongside that line. This is the change that happens. So let us explore this. Back to Mom on the boat, just arrived, and they are sent to a refugee camps or Holocaust survivors camps or illegal immigrants camp by Atlit, that is now a museum of the clandestine immigration. And but soon enough, because of Mom's pregnancy, released and come to Kvutzat Geva, as in Gevatron, the singing choir. This is where my family is, and this is a kibbutz. These people have not waited for Hitler to become Zionist. The kibbutz is celebrating this year, 2022, its 100th anniversary. It was established in 1922 by Litvak, verbrannte socialist Zionists. And here is my mom, the Holocaust survivor, mind you, Orthodox background, meeting with those people. Well, it's a kibbutz and you're a new immigrant, you need to work. What can my mother do? It's not real pictures of my mom. They were not busy taking pictures at the time, but similar enough. She has no language. She has no professional training. The Holocaust interrupted her studies, but she can always work in the kitchen, peel veggies for, the communal lunch of the kibbutz, a few hundred people. Next to her is sitting an old-timer kibbutz member, 25 years in the land, socialist, a killer. And she turns to her. This is the first survivor she meets. So don't be angry with her. And she says, no, what was it like, the Holocaust? As bad as we are hearing? Mom collects all the common language that she has with the person, a little bit of German. My mother had the person from being a Litvak has some Yiddish, so they can converse. And she starts explaining, and this is, by the way, the woman in the back with the toddler in her arms. That's my mom with me a year later or so in that kibbutz, Kvutzat Geva. Okay? So she starts explaining how they lived in that part of Budapest, just across the street from the Orthodox synagogue. Obviously, everybody was Jewish in the building. Like, who lives just across the street from the main Orthodox synagogue? And they were, it was fine. They were not as famous and rich as their professor, but not exactly as the Satmara either, somewhere in between. And then one day in the summer of 1944, which is when it happens to Budapest Jews, a local fascist, not even a German, comes into the courtyard, shoots one shot in the air, and says for everybody to go down. That's the Orthodox synagogue, but it is renovated now, not what it looked like in 1946. And when it's inside, I always, these are real pictures that I took. I love visiting it. It's not where I go to services when I am in Budapest, but I love visiting it. So here's the building again, and there is that local fascist, and he is shooting one shot in the air, and they are going down, and they are led to where Jews were led those days. Our dear local kibbutz members, 25 years in the ground, listened to my mother. Many of them did listen, you know. And then she opens the big state's set of eyes on my mom and says, and why did you? And my mother doesn't understand the question. And she goes like, why did we what? And the woman says, why did you follow his orders? Why didn't one of you from the third floor, you know, grab a piano, a chair, a table, anything? And you have dropped it on the head of that accursed Nazi and you would have run. Now, this is Los Angeles I'm speaking to. You must have met Israelis in your lifetime. That happens to you when you live in Los Angeles. Can you hear macho Israel talking in that set of questions? Know it all Israel talking in that set of questions. What would have happened to us? My mother, on her first day in the kibbutz, straight from the immigrants camp, had no way of handling that. A lesson is learned that day. Shut up. These people, you know, they give her a roof over her head, enough food, not great, but abundant, a place to have a baby. Is she gonna argue? No. But the lesson is learned. Don't talk to them. They may mean well, they don't get it. Talk in safe circles. People like you, who will not ask the stupid questions. 8.5 years later, when the baby is 8 years old, baby being myself, she decides, I think it was because she was pregnant again with my sister Ilana. She starts including me in the safe circle. So she will tell me the story about the yellow star. This is a picture from the Budapest ghetto. And what had happened to them, and how that guy came into the inner court, and how he shot one shot in the air, and how they all went down and followed him to where they were supposed to go. And then she added a sentence for the sake of the proper upbringing of her Israeli-born Sabra daughter. And the sentence was, and we were stupid enough to follow his orders. This is the narrative I was raised on. Holocaust survivors, I'm not saying everybody, but many had accepted the Israeli narrative. They didn't fight it. Now, when you're 8, mom is God. When you're 18, you know as well as I that she doesn't get it. But there comes a time when your mother becomes smart again. How old do you need to be for that? 30 or something? But they do become smart again. And then you can start having conversations with her. And this is already well into the 70s or so. And we say, you know, Mom, maybe it was not all your fault. Maybe Hitler might have had something to do with that. And maybe that other guy, Eichmann, also. I'm taking you into my adult years as Israel is changing, going through its wars, going into its tragedies like the Yom Kippur War, etc. When we start having the conversations, responsibility of the victims says who? This is, by the way, a picture that I never neglect to show. My mother was an avid swimmer in the Mediterranean, and she liked to play matkot, which is beach tennis. So she's the one in the center. All the ladies, her young ladies, all Holocaust survivors. And I need for you to see this picture so that we remember that they were alive, dynamic, vibrant human beings who gave us life. And therefore, I put on the screen to conclude the pictures of 3 people that I know personally. Rabbi Benny Lau, who is a child of survivors, 2nd generation, whose father was the brother of the famous Rabbi Lau, who was chief rabbi in Israel and then the rabbi of Tel Aviv. And Benny, I used to speak together with him oftentimes in panel. Benny, whose father, according to him, was not brave enough because we needed the partisan stories, and the Mordechai and the Levi stories. Benny's father saved his brother by carrying him in a backpack. That was not brave enough for Benny. He invented a partisan career for his father when he was going to Bnei Akiva. Professor Hannah Yablonka became a scholar, a researcher of the second generation in Israel and the survivors and what happened to them and how they became a major part. And the last that I want you to just look at the picture, they are still all with us and active and wonderful people, is retired Colonel Zev Raz, who was heading the attack against the nuclear center in Baghdad many years ago and destroying it. He is still a very son of a Holocaust survivor, a friend of my mother, Chaya Raz, of blessed memory, of course. This is the time where a new generation is coming into the decision makers, the museum makers, the curriculum developers, and people like us will start asking the questions. Responsibility of the victim says who? Let us look at our narrative again and try to see how we can create a new museum and inaugurate it already 17 years ago that will be a non-judgmental one, that will tell the story of the Holocaust without saying who was more heroic than who. So if you have not yet visited this quote-unquote new museum, it's time to plan your next Israel trip. And I promise you, you don't need now my introductory lecture. You just can go straight ahead and enjoy it. Thank you very much for being with me this evening, this morning. For me, it's already 6:15, and you can see the sun shining through my windows, my terrace that is overlooking the Mediterranean. And Toda Rabba for having me.
Makasha. Thank you, Rachel. Let me ask you, before you get up and have breakfast.
I have my coffee, don't worry.
I know, well, I worry about it. So tell us just, Ishit, how are Israelis commemorating this day? What do Israeli families do today?
Okay, so I think, you do have the central ceremonies, but you want personal? Okay, let's do personal. In Hanaton, which is where my daughter and granddaughter live, Roni is 15 and she with her friend Shaya is responsible for organizing the Noar commemoration ceremony. So this is what I can tell you about Hanaton. They have a larger service for the whole community. By the Noar, the youth are planning their own activity. And my granddaughter, one of 8 grandchildren that we have, Yossi and I, is involved in planning it. In most places in Israel, we now have what we call Zikaron Basalon, commemorating in the living room, where you do not go to major ceremonies, but rather invite a survivor, if you can still have one, or second generation person, and gather a few people, not many, in your living room to tell stories. Israeli television has nothing but Holocaust-related programs on this day. Movie theaters are closed or screening documentaries. Coffee shops, restaurants are closed on the eve of Yom HaShoah. In front of major national organizations, you will have the Lechol Ish Yashem ceremony, where people stand up and just read names of people of the 6 million. So they are not an anonymous number, but have names. There are many, many different activities. It will be very hard for me to describe all of them, but the whole country is involved in one, even where I live in Jaffa, even with my Arab friends who will reach out to me on this day, who will ask something, and it's, it's the night of Muhammad, this night, this year. And yet my Muslim friends who are very involved in services, etc. It's a very important Al Qadr night, the end of the Ramadan, which happened last night, and they will still be reaching out to me.
So let me follow up with another question. And again, I'm interested in your personal experience. So the strangeness of this week, it's in many ways a lot like Rosh Hashanah followed by Yom Kippur. You have Yom HaShoah tonight, and then a week from now, you will have Yom HaZikaron and Yom HaAtzmaut. So tell me how it feels. Yeah.
I'll tell you. First of all, in my circles, we call this in Hebrew, Hayamim Noraim Shel Ha'aviv. We call them the days of awe of spring, because, you know, springtime here. But I don't want you to jump over very quickly from today to next week. I do not need to tell you that there is a Shabbat in the middle. And in many Israeli congregations, this is now a growing new custom to refer to this Shabbat as Shabbat Kuma, the Shabbat of Revival. Just like we have Shabbat Shira and Shabbat Gadol and Shabbat Nachamu, many Israeli congregations are now consecrating the Shabbat in between to this process of going from destruction to revival. And we are starting to see growing new traditions for Shabbat Kuma, which if you are not doing yet, I'm inviting you to consider. It's a weird week. It's heavy. I can share with you, Ori, my son, my oldest, going on 52 now, born in the year 70. When he was 6 years old and we were coming back from, I don't remember, Kita Aleph or still Gan, kindergarten, in between these days, and he is 6. And he says to me, you know, Ima, that day with the Germans is much sadder than that day with the Arabs, the worst of Islam. At 6 already they know that there is awe in both, but there are differences between what was done unto us there and the ongoing struggle for the state of Israel. But you know, Ed, you asked me and not another person. There are also other changes. And working our way towards Yom HaZikaron, there is now an organization of Jews and Palestinians together who are commemorating their victims together on Yom HaZikaron. And that, by some people, gives reason for a lot of controversy, and others say, no, it's time for us to recognize the pain of the other, the pain of our neighbor. I belong to those people. As we are coming towards Yom HaZikaron, I will not join the ceremonies. Yossi will, because I will be teaching. Guess who and guess what on that day? But this is also something that is happening in the country, and you may want to be aware of, not necessarily agreeing, but it's there.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you so very, very, very much. And before we say goodnight to everybody, let me just remind everyone that, well, this Shabbat is Shabbat HaTkuma, which I think is so beautiful. What a beautiful, beautiful new custom. And you're all invited to come to Valley Beth Shalom if you're so inclined to come and pray with us. The Neshama Minyan, a beautiful spiritual musical minyan where Rachel has taught for some time. We'll be meeting this Shabbat. Rachel will be in Israel, but Nina will be there. And you're all invited to come, as well as the Playground Minyan is joining this Shabbat. So come and pray with us. Next Wednesday night, we will continue our learning with Rachel. Of course, she will be getting up again at 4:30 in the morning, and it's Yom HaAtzmaut for her. So you all better show up. She's giving up her beautiful, beautiful holiday to come and teach with us. And that will be our closing session of this wonderful conversation about Israeli culture and Israeli identity. Today has been remarkable. So Rachel, kol hakavod lach, toda rabah, and thank you for spending this time with all of us. And to everyone here in wherever you are, let me wish you a very meaningful and touching and moving Yom HaShoah and a very quiet week. And we'll see each other Shabbat and next Wednesday night. Take good care, everyone. Stay well.
Okay, Ilana, will this be the link for next week? Shall I keep it?
You should, and we will send you another one.
Yes, you should.
Okay, good. Bye-bye. Later on. Thank you for being
Thank
with
you.